Hey, what is going on? All right, after these stories, you are going to have some insider knowledge, and this is definitely going to help you go against bigger people. Yeah, because I definitely have experience being 135 pounds, what it's like to go against bigger people, both on and off the mat. So let's get into some stories. And when you find your passion, it ignites you as a person. You just feel awesome. All right, it was 3 months into starting jiu-jitsu, and my roommate and I, John, were sitting down one Friday night in the living room, and he was such a great dude. He has like an engineering type mind, and he was very curious about how jiu-jitsu worked. And so he's like, Crystal, do you wanna go? And I'm like, why not? So in my mind, I'm like, all right, it's go time. So I get to his back, and believe me, it was not the most graceful thing. It was not technical at all. So I get to the back and I slap on the RNC. And so he taps out, and afterwards he just sat back and he was like, whoa. He was like, Crystal, he was like, I was completely unprepared for that. He's like, I didn't even have a plan. You went in and you had a plan. I had zero plan. And that is the beauty of jiu-jitsu. When you are even 3 months in and you are going up against somebody who's heavier than you with zero experience in combat sports or jiu-jitsu or any type of wrestling background, if they have zero experience and you have a game plan versus somebody who has no clue, has no game plan, that definitely gives you a huge advantage. So it's like size becomes less of an issue once you introduce skill. Now, that being said, when you first start jiu-jitsu, and let's say you're on the smaller side, you're going to be going up against people who are bigger than you. And if they're bigger than you and have skill, like that presents another problem. Like there's no way I was gonna step onto the mats going up against white belts that have some experience, like they know enough to not give their back up, right? Like it's not going to be an easy time. So here are some tips that will help you as a beginner on the mat when you are a smaller person, because off the mat, if they're not experienced, just get their back, girl. Or boy, guy, just get their back. So let's say you are a smaller person and you're going up on the mat. Here are some tips that have definitely helped me. So the first tip I would give a smaller person going up against bigger people is that frames are everything. So a frame is when you are using, like one example is when you're using your forearms to brace against their neck. Typically you're going to be on the bottom of side control, and you're using the structure of your bones to make space. And one of the biggest mistakes I see that beginners use is that they will try to bench press people and use their muscle. No. Anytime possible, use your bone structure, use the frame of your bones to support weight. That way you are conserving energy, and it doesn't take much strength in order to make space, which makes it easier for you to escape. So if you're starting from standing and they get a takedown, try to put your frames up, or at least get an underhook. So I can do a little demonstration of what the frames would look like. So you basically don't want their body weight on top of your chest. Once they settle into side control. All right, so if Gary were to try to get on top of me.
That's fine.
Yep. I would want, you down here. So let's say he just got a takedown. I basically would want to put my frames up. So my knees and my elbows are going to be together. Otherwise than that, if I keep all of this open, then he can just come into side control. And then after that, I have a lot more work to do. Also another thing too is beating them to the underhook. Like if I can get this underhook when he's on top of me, that makes escaping a hell of a lot easier because you're already at step number 1 to the escape. So yeah, definitely defensively, try not to stay on the bottom, don't let them settle, put up some frames, and try to get an underhook as soon as possible. If you can beat them to the underhook, then you're more golden than not. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So number 1, frames. Frames are going to be your best friend. Learn about frames, especially when you're on bottom positions, like on the bottom of side control, for example. And also, when you first get into a crappy position, those first few seconds, if you know exactly what you're doing in those first few seconds and you execute quickly before they have time to settle, that is key. So make sure you have good frames and make sure you know the escapes. That way you can just get to work right away and you're not letting them settle on you, because once you have like 200 pounds settled on you, that's so much more work than trying to escape when they haven't settled all their weight on you yet. You know, you still have you still have time to get out of there, to be gone. All right, so frames, timing, so not letting them settle. And then also hip placement. In jiu-jitsu, hips are everything. And this is especially true when you are smaller and you are trying to take down a bigger person. So for example, if let's say you wanted to do a takedown, like a crotch lift, where you are, you have your hands like this, like in a cable grip, and you're trying to lift them off the mat, your hip placement and having straight arms is super important. One trick that I learned that's really helpful is how to lift somebody properly. So basically, if I have this side clinch on Gary and I want to lift him up, it's going to be really hard if I am lifting him up just using my arms, because my legs are a hell of a lot stronger than my arms. So basically, anytime you're a smaller person trying to lift up a larger person, make sure your arms are straight and lift with your legs, and also try to get below their center of gravity. If you've ever seen, like, let's say a fridge being wheeled into a house or something heavy, those dollies go underneath the center of gravity and then tilt upwards. So you're basically doing that same thing with your grip, and you're using your hips to kind of like bump them up. So I'm going to lift Gary using as little energy as possible. So we're here, I have my arms straight, I'm close, and when I lift, I use my hips. So you can be a smaller person going up against a bigger person, and you can lift them up using little to no strength if you have the proper technique, which would be keeping your arms straight, you know, a good grip, and then putting your hips next to theirs and getting your hips lower than their hips. So this is true if you're doing something like a crotch lift, or if you're like in the clinch and you're trying to take them down, like a front side clinch takedown. It's true there, it's true for the crotch lift. If you're doing any type of like hip throw, what makes it so much easier is when you bend your knees and you get under their hips and your butt is like under their hips. That way when your knees straighten again, you're already like propping their weight on you. So it doesn't take much force to get them thrown over you. So that hip placement is going to be your friend. All right, so what do we have so far for a smaller opponent? If you're the smaller opponent going up against a bigger person, if it's off the mat, they have no skill, no problem, just take their back, go for the RNC. When you're on the mat, completely different story. So we have frames, make sure they don't settle again and get all their weight on you when you're in a negative position, in a bottom position. That way you can use your escapes quickly and get out of there before you have to deal with like 200 pounds. And then hip placement. So be aware of where your hips are when you're trying to do takedowns, and rely on your bone structure versus muscling through things. Another tip I would definitely give is using your head. And this isn't, of course it means like thinking, but what it also means is think of your head as like a kickstand. So let's say you are on the top of a mount, you have somebody mounted and they are trying to bridge and roll and they are trying to get you off of them. If you have the ability to use your head against the mat as a kickstand, as a post, that's like a third arm, right? So if they have one arm trapped and they're trying to roll you, if you can use your head as a post, then you have one extra extremity that is working for you. And as a like smaller person, it's like so great to know these like little tips and tricks that way. That way you can use like everything that you have. So that makes, you know, defending somebody trying to do a, you know, trying to defend the escape of somebody trying to escape from being mounted. Yeah, that makes, you know, your counter a lot better. The next one that I would highly recommend, and this goes along too with what I was talking about before with grips and trying to get good hip positioning for takedowns. There's grips that you can do that are really helpful. Like one grip is like this cable grip, and one thing that you have to keep in mind is you never ever want to use your thumbs. So like never, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. That's because thumbs can break. So you never want to have your thumbs out when you're doing grips. So this is a good grip, this is a good grip, this is especially good if, let's say, you want to get around somebody bigger and you can't get to this gives you a little more circumference to wrap your arms around them. So grips are also important. As far as like takedowns go, the Kazushi is what it's called. So basically knowing how to off balance your opponent and at what angle they're most vulnerable to being off balanced. That way you don't have to use as much force to get them down if you're already using gravity for like as your friend, using gravity as your partner to help you get them down. All right, so the next principle is Kazushi, or off balancing, right? So if Gary's standing here and both of his feet are level, then the off balancing direction is either this way or this way. If he's standing in a fighting position, then off balancing him would be in a diagonal position. So here and here. If I were to try to push him back while he's in the fighting stance, it's a lot harder because he has that back leg to back him up. So yeah, the beauty of jiu-jitsu is being able to use like all these techniques and being able to use your body as a lever and using the like laws of gravity and physics to your advantage. That's the beautiful thing. That's the whole thing about like how you can use jiu-jitsu as a smaller person to go against somebody who is bigger. Of course, like I said before, it all depends if that bigger person has skill and how much skill they do have, because then that presents a whole bunch of, you know, other things that you have to deal with if they're actually know what they're doing. And finally, my final tip for being a smaller person on the mat, I remember when I visited Africa, I hung out with the Maasai. So basically, they don't do this anymore, but they used to. In order to like graduate to become, you know, on the next level of human, you had to go up against a lion. And you only had a shield and this like little spear, but do you know, it wasn't the shield or the spear that scared the lion, it was your attitude. It was if you could present a confidence that was believable enough heart for the animal to think that you could mess it up. And that type of heart and belief in yourself is very pivotal on the mats. And I find like even if you have zero confidence in your ability to do a technique because let's say it's never worked for you before, just having that blind faith that like this time is going to work. This time is the time. It hasn't worked before, but this time is the time. That having that blind faith in yourself is really going to help you. And once you can practice that to get moves to work on the mat, it definitely makes life like as a whole much better, because you're practicing believing in yourself when, you know, one part of you is like, Crystal, like this shit is not gonna work, and the other part is like, shh, it's gonna work this time. So, you know, practicing that voice of like positivity and encouragement, even with like zero historic results, is like very pivotal if you want to make something happen that hasn't happened before. I am like very excited that you're, you know, doing jiu-jitsu, thinking about doing jiu-jitsu, like a beginner. And these tips of, I gave you a lot. So like use your frames, hip placement, knowing kubushi and like the points of off balancing, super important. Make sure that you know your escapes and know what to do right off the bat. That way you're not giving them time to settle. And then also like practicing your heart, practicing like the faith that you have in yourself for you to accomplish something and do something, to do a technique on the mat that you have never done before, or maybe you failed like hundreds of times. Like to still have faith that it's going to work and still go at it with 100% intention and belief that it will work, that'll get you there. All right, so until next time, realize bjj@gmail.com if you have any more questions. Heart and believing that what you're doing will work, even though it's failed hundreds of times before.